And the United States has announced a new weapons package for Ukraine worth $2.2 billion. It includes new, longer-range missiles, which could double the distance Ukraine can strike and put Russia's supply lines in eastern Ukraine within reach. More armored vehicles and air defense systems are also being provided. The latest package brings the total U.S. support for Ukraine since Russia's invasion to more than $29 billion. And the aid comes as Kyiv's forces are struggling against an intensifying Russian assault on the city of Bakhmut. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says his forces will hold Bakhmut, quoting now, for as long as we can. And military analyst Frank Ledwidge is going to join us now for more on this from Oxford. Frank, up until now, the Americans have declined to send Ukraine these longer-range missiles for, in their words, fear of provoking Russia into escalating the conflict. So what's changed?
Well, Nick, the missiles that Ukraine asked for, which are called ATACMS, they're still not getting. What they are getting are something called the ground-launched small-diameter bombs, which are about half the range of those, for about 93 miles, 150 kilometres or so. And you yourself hinted at the purpose for this. The HIMARS, for which these missiles are designed, or indeed the other launch systems, the M270, multiple launch rocket systems, the Russians have realised that clearly they've had their logistics wrecked by these over the last couple of months, as most of your viewers will have appreciated. So they've moved those logistical bases further back behind their lines. The problem for the Russians now is that these longer-range missiles that the Ukrainians are getting, 150 kilometres, will now challenge those. And that's really important, actually, because what it will do is force the Russians once again to push back their logistical chain way back behind their lines, unless they want them wrecked again, as happened in October, November and December.
And just, if we may, get to Bakhmut, where intense fighting is continuing. President Zelenskyy is saying Ukraine will fight for as long as we can. How long will that likely be, do you think?
OK, a couple of things here. As yet, the Russians have not got into the town of Bakhmut itself. It's a real dilemma for the Ukrainians. We're informed by pretty informed commentators and at least one Western intelligence service that the Americans have already advised the Ukrainians to withdraw from Bakhmut on their own terms, just in case they get surrounded and they can't withdraw on their own terms. Withdrawal under fire is very difficult. It needs a lot of planning. So the calculation that Ukrainian commanders have to make, General Zaluzhny, Zelenskyy, of course, and some of the subordinate commanders, is whether it's worth holding on as long as possible and measuring that against the huge cost. At the moment, clearly, Zelenskyy indicates they'll be hanging on. And
just for the bigger picture, if I may. Now, I know you're not in Joe Biden's head, but is it fair to assume that Washington calculated that losing Bakhmut and Donetsk is a bigger risk than escalating tensions with Russia in terms of providing that extra new weaponry?
Yeah, I don't, Nick, see escalation as a real risk here. I don't think that's part of US calculations, except in insofar as they're getting the sort of compromise rocket system rather than the one they asked for, the much longer range ATACMS. Bakhmut itself is only important strategically in the oblast of Donetsk because of the resources that both sides have put into it. And it's a perfect example of military sunk costs. In other words, its importance is it derives out of the losses that both sides have taken so far and that they're willing to expend to hold on to it. It has no other intrinsic strategic importance, save insofar as it'll give Russia a small town, which they've taken 6 months to take, and bodes very ill for them for the much larger targets beyond there of Sloviansk and Kramatorsk.
OK, military analyst Frank Ledwidge, thanks so much for that insight.
Thank you, Nick.
I'm now joined by DW's Russia analyst Konstantin Eggert. Konstantin, up until now, the U.S. has declined to send Ukraine longer-range missiles for fear of provoking Russia into escalating the conflict. So what's changed?
Well, I think that the decision by Germany to send Leopard tanks and generally this new consensus among the allies that Ukraine should be better supplied definitely contributed to that. And I think also the plans for Washington and for the allies now if they do not include, at least yet, full victory for Ukraine and full recovery of Ukrainian territory, then at least the idea that Ukraine should be able to significantly push back against the Russian forces before any kind of quote-unquote peace talks start, I think is now pretty firmly established, both in Washington and major European capitals.
What's the response been from the Kremlin?
Well, first, Michael, the kind of thing that could be done with these weapons, I mean, has been shown this morning. Russian Telegram channels and YouTube are full of images from the Belgorod region, which is bordering Ukraine, where allegedly an oil depot and a factory were hit by a Ukrainian hit. We don't know with what, allegedly missiles. And it's been confirmed by the local Russian authorities. That's exactly what I think the Russian experts fear. There was no response from the Kremlin, but some military analysts are already saying that the idea to supply Ukraine with these weapons means, first and foremost of all, putting the Crimea firmly within the range of Ukrainian armed forces in essentially trying to destabilize Russia's hold on the Azov Sea littoral and basically breaking the land connection between Russia and the Crimea that Putin managed to establish last year. That seems to be worrying at least the Russian military experts quite a lot.
As always, many thanks to our Konstantin Eggert.